Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I am John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic for you today. Here we go. What's the most unsettling encounter that you have ever had with another human being? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I walked in to pay for my petrol. It was me, a young cashier, and this guy. He just started talking to me and kept asking weird questions. I couldn't tell you why, but he made my hair stand on edge. It was clear he wasn't within his right mind, and he wouldn't let me leave the store. After about 10 minutes of talking about the most random things, he just decides to leave the store. 30 minutes later, he was dead, shot by police, very, very rare in my country, as he went to the police station and tried to shoot them. I only knew that as he made the news, they showed the mugshot from a previous arrest. My bar got robbed. Dudes told us everyone down. We complied, obviously. It wasn't even a little scared. I was down, but had my head up watching everything from Fascination. It was sort of exciting. Then one of the robbers made eye contact with me and just stopped what he was doing and stared at me. I took my cue and buried my head in my arms. Everything was so quiet. Then I heard his slow steps on the wood floor come right up to me. And while looking down, I saw his feet on each side of my head, standing right over me. All I could think is that this effer is going to shoot me in the back of the head. It sucked so bad. I don't know how long he stood there, probably only 10 seconds, but it felt like 5 minutes. Shiver. Regardless of the cringe posts I make, believe it or not, he didn't shoot me. I mean, I know people say keep your head down, sure, but I'd be curious too, so yeah, I get it, and I'm glad you didn't get shot in the back of the head, or anywhere. I'm a nurse. I had a patient with a snow-white beard and a big round belly. He was a Santa at those shacks around Christmas. My instincts did not like him. He made my hair stand on end. I had my back to him in the patient's room. I heard something fall off his bedside table, so I turned around and said to him, "Your toothbrush fell." He hard stared me and pushed his toothpaste on the floor, and then continues to stare at me. I left the room. The toothbrush stayed on the floor for hours until he picked it up. As a nurse, I deal with creepy, violent, and manipulative people frequently, but there was something about his staring me down and lack of words that made me slightly uncomfortable. The worst part is, he works with kids. They sit in his lap. It makes me sick. In early 1994, I was working an evening shift alone in a convenience store. Paul Hill came into the store. Hill was one of the clinic protesters in town. He kept to himself, carrying big apocalyptic signs and walking back and forth. I volunteered at the clinics to keep those weasels from harassing patients and staff, so I didn't really see a difference between him and the rest. But I'd heard chatter that the other protesters were afraid of him. Understandable. Here he is in my store, at the counter, quietly pleasant as he pays for his items, and all the while I'm freezing. I've rarely had someone scare me, but this effer set off all those little inner alarms. He had that preacher look, the haircut, the boyish face, but over 6 feet tall, about a head taller than me. It was a relief when he left, like I could breathe again. I don't know if he was actually just a customer, or if he was scoping me out. I'd had some of them roll past my house, had my car vandalized. Those didn't scare me, and I doubt he had anything to do with it. Several months passed. On July 29th, 1994, Paul Hill ambushed and murdered my friend Jim Barrett and Dr. John Britton in the driveway of one of the clinics, blasted each of them with a shotgun. The first time I actually got hit on by an older man, I was 16, still pretty shy and didn't get a lot of attention from guys my age, so fully did not expect an adult man to be interested. I was at the bookstore in the mall, and he was following me around, but I thought I was imagining it. Then he asked me to come out to dinner with him. He was like 50, so I thought he must be confused. I told him I was 16 and in high school, thinking he would be so embarrassed when he realized, but he just said, "That's okay," and ran his fingers up and down my upper arm. Ugh. I was creeped out for sure, but it makes my effing blood boil that a middle-aged man who definitely knew I was a minor even tried that. So effing gross. I've had many, many experiences of all kinds of harassment, a lot of it from older men when I was very young, but that was the first time one tried to actually get with me, and he also put his hands on me, which is so disgusting. What a bold and brash creep. 50 years old, hitting on a 16-year-old. Disgusting. Had an armed robbery during a party at our home when I was 10. 7 armed men came in, threatened and controlled the crowd of 34 of us. I remember very clearly that my mother was calling from the other side of the house asking for me. I was the youngest there by far. We were all on the floor trying to communicate to my parents that I was all right, but struggled to. I heard a slight commotion from the kitchen, followed by the most sickening crunching sound I've ever heard in my life, which I later found out was my father's nose breaking on the hilt of a gun when he was trying to get to me. This lasted for hours, while they took our belongings. One of the armed men allowed me to crawl to meet my mother while being shouted at with, "Don't effing look at my face," repeatedly. They asked my father to show them to the safe, which we didn't have, but repeatedly until they threatened to start shooting. Second only to the crunching sound earlier that night was the gut-wrenching sound of a weapon being cocked. I instinctively looked up for a brief moment at the man who did. There was not a single spark of empathy in his eyes. Thankfully, our compliance led to them locking us in a room while they made off with a vehicle and all our belongings. I was waiting at a bus stop alone on a deserted street pre-dawn. A black man, pertinent to the story, crossed the street and came toward me. He grabbed my arm and started screaming at me. "What are you looking at, you effing white bitch? And I'm gonna cut your face, bitch." I kept telling him to get out of my face, but he continued threatening me. It was terrifying. Fortunately, the bus arrived fairly quickly. The driver was black. He told the guy assaulting me to back down. The assailant told him white bitches needed to be put in their place. The driver got off the bus, told the assailant I was a really nice woman, and escorted me onto the bus, telling the assailant he couldn't get on with me. I've never been more happier to see a bus, not before or since. Desert Storm. Coming into the aftermath of an armor battle, there was an Iraqi soldier who had effectively been blown in half, nothing left of his body below the navel. He was still alive, and I guess the shock was enough that he didn't even realize he was already dead. He saw us and started shouting at us and trying to grab his weapon to shoot at us. He died less than a minute after that, but it was still an insane thing to experience. I had a guy pull a knife on me outside of a bar. I managed to twist his arm back and trip him when he slashed at me. The knife punctured his back just a bit, but at the same time, I thought I killed him. He was rolling around on the ground, bleeding and flailing. His buddy grabbed the knife and walked away while I turned to calm him down and hold pressure on the wound. After a few minutes, he struggled loose and just walked away. He was fine. I threw up. About a minute later, saw the guy about a month after that, and he wouldn't make eye contact. That whole thing sucked. Just cause I've been sitting on this one for a while, I popped into a Salvation Army looking for something for a last-minute Halloween costume, found what I needed, and was waiting in line at the cashier. I had a headphone in one ear and was minding my own business when the woman next to me starts making conversation. I'm only kind of half listening, but she starts telling me a story about how her neighbor's horse recently had a baby, and the lady's Great Dane was super interested. I'm expecting to hear some kind of animal friendship story, only to then be told the dog ate the baby horse. The dog ate the baby horse. I took out my earpiece and had to ask for clarification, and she started to go into details when I stopped her. I was in utter shock for a moment until the cashier called me up, and at that point, I just paid and left. To this day, I have to wonder, why would you have to tell this story to a random person? Like, why? I live in Arkansas for context. I had a run-in with a state trooper in the early morning hours on the way to work. He was driving 45 miles an hour on the interstate, in the left-hand lane, I might add. I passed him without speeding, and he immediately hit his blue lights and pulled me over. I knew something was wrong when I saw him get out of his car. Dude was in a pure rage. He came up to my window and started screaming and yelling, saying that I was endangering everyone on the road by driving so fast and reckless. So reckless. Spit was flying out of this dude's mouth, and the more he talked, the louder he got, and the more incoherent he became. He tried to give me a ticket for reckless driving because I was going, according to him anyways, 25 miles over the speed limit. Thing is, I wasn't. He was going 25 miles under the speed limit. I figured out pretty quickly that he was high as a kite on some pretty bad shit. When I told him this, he became enraged again. It wasn't until I raised my voice that he snapped back to reality. There was a speed limit sign about 50 feet away, in front of us. When I asked him what it said, he turned his bloodshot eyes toward the sign, then back at me. He didn't say another word. He just got back in his car and tore off, throwing roadside gravel toward my car as he did so. I still think about it all the time. I got real close to going to jail or worse for doing what I was supposed to be doing in the first place. It was one of the strangest, most dangerous encounters I've ever had. Was at a works night out when I was about 19. I was absolutely hammered, and the office weirdo asked me back to his house as I could get a taxi from his place. If I used his phone. This was the days before common cell phone use. I agreed, got back to the house, and he immediately locked all the doors and wouldn't let me leave. I called for a cab and asked what his address was, and he replied, "No one must know my address." He acted like this for about half an hour. Before and after, then relented and unlocked the door. I'm pretty sure he had no serious malevolent intentions and was just trying to act like an arsehole. But the whole thing was horrible at the time. Got to work the following Monday, and he didn't mention it. Incidentally, his nickname in the office was Murder Gloves on account that he wore black leather gloves every day. I mean, Murder Gloves is a pretty cool nickname, but wearing gloves all day long, I mean, you earned that one, buddy. So, anyway, glad you're alright. A couple of weeks ago, I was walking on a park trail with my wife, and it was nice. Cold, but nice. Eventually, we come upon an older lady with the dog on a leash, no problem. It's nice to see someone following the leash rules. The dog gets excited, so we try to get as far from it as possible to pass. It's a fairly wide trail, but it turns out that it cannot control her dog. To set the picture, she was 5'0", and the dog was seriously the biggest Rottweiler I'd ever seen, like it was a mini tank, and she could not keep it from getting closer to us. She's yelling up a storm, and it isn't until we are just about to get by her when she makes it clear she isn't yelling at the dog, but at us. Let's make this stop. Damn it, you assholes. Okay, weird. So we stop, and she continues hurling invectives at us like we're the problem. That it was our fault. She could not keep her dog from pulling her along, and she had a full right to the trail. After a couple minutes of this, we had to turn around because it was clear she was right and we were wrong. Heavy sarcasm. And She wasn't going to do anything other than curse and yell. To be fair to the story, I was also cursing at her because she's dumb effing bitch who shouldn't be allowed out in the world. But she had the power of conversation. All she had to do was let go, and it would have been over. It ruined a fairly nice morning until we could remember and start making fun of her again. While my drunk parents were sitting upstairs with the TV on, my wild animal brother, I was 10 to 11 years old, brother would have been about 15. He stood me up on a rickety old high chair, put a rope noose around my neck, and tied the other end to a steel beam running across the ceiling, gave me a little push, and ran up the stairs and out the door. I acted fast, at least for a kid. I gauged the distance to the stairwell, let out an heave-ho, and just managed to grab the stairs wall. Pulled off the noose, and with a rage I never felt before, went looking for my brother with nothing but bro's blood on my mind. I didn't find him. He was lucky. Years later, my junior high school principal told me, "Your brother has a big red flag behind his name in every school district in the county."